who the heck is this guy standing up here? You might want to know. So my life mission, I think each of us has a life mission. My life mission is I want a seat at the table of decision making. I want to be at the table of decision making. And that's important because I think each of us has an option and an opportunity to be an advocate for a group of people who may not have a voice. May not have a voice about where they get to sleep at night, may not have a voice about what they get to eat, may not have a voice about the clothes they wear, you know, all of these different things. And if you're seated at that table and you're thinking about the humanity of the people that you're serving, then you are the voice at the table of decision making. Not necessarily advocating for you, but maybe for advocating for people who are voiceless in a process. Does that make sense? So that's my own personal mission. You might have yours. But I'm the pastor of Liberation United Church of Christ, dean of students at SU. I identify as a black male. I use the terms he, him, his as my gender pronouns. Identify as queer. I'm a brother, son, grandson, friend, and I'm on a journey. And I think that's important too in my own identity because I don't come to you as an expert about anything. I'm not coming to you with specific answers. I don't have the magic red pill that once you take it and you understand everything there is about queer, trans, people of color, because there is no such thing. Even as a person who identifies in some of those categories, I still make big mistakes, or I make errors, or I say wrong terms, or I accidentally call somebody a gender pronoun that is not theirs, and I have to figure it out. So I want you to see my role here today as a companion along a journey of exploration. Can we all agree to be companions today? So again, there are no right or wrong answers here. We are in a community together working towards being in solidarity with some people who really, really need us. Go to the next slide. So we're going to make some community agreements. Go to the next slide. One thing that would be helpful here is respect. How many of you want to be disrespectful to each other? I imagine nobody would say that. I'm going to ask everyone to use I statements, which means that in this space, we want you to own your thoughts. So if you feel something or you're thinking something, then take the risk to say, I believe, I think, I feel. It's really comfortable in a group to say, well, people think, or my mom is really intense on that. Some people feel, and really it's her. So I'm inviting you to just say, I. I love this one. One mic, one diva, right? So let one person who's speaking be the person who is speaking. We don't need to cross-talk, we don't need to talk over, we don't need to have a side conversation on the side about how you would have said it differently or more eloquently or used a couple of other words. So just let that one mic, that one diva person speak. Move up and move back. If you're the kind of person who's like, I typically just sit back and watch and wait for other people to burn, then you might be the person to say, let me stand up, let me offer a thought. Because often the people who are quietly waiting to the side, they usually have this profound idea that the rest of us would be blessed by. So move up, and if you're the person that's always like, me, I've been chosen, I've been called, then maybe you're the person who's, for some things, should sort of pull back and say, maybe let me let somebody else sort of speak up or offer the idea, and then ask yourself this question, wait, why am I talking? And so the thing that I want you to consider here is that none of us, we don't need to give each other advice, which I know all of us love to do. We don't need to fix anybody, and we don't need to take care of anybody. So if you release yourself from that, I don't need to give advice, I don't need to fix, and I don't need to take care of. That means that if I say something or if I get to a place where I'm sharing something about me and then it causes some sort of emotion, then let me have my emotion. One of the things that we often do, and it's a psychological thing, somebody starts crying, we immediately push the tissue box. And what we think we're doing is, oh, I'm comforting you, I want you to be okay. But that tissue box says, stop! You're overwhelming me. I don't want to experience this. Please, wipe it up. I mean, that's the fact. That's what we're doing. And in this kind of space, what we need to be able to do is be comfortable saying, okay, have your moment. It's all right. And maybe somebody having their moment invites you to have yours. Does that make sense? So again, wait, why am I talking? Am I trying to fix? Am I trying to give advice? Am I trying to take care of? So we're going to do our first activity, and I know you guys have already said your name, but I'm going to ask you to share again your preferred name, and then I'm going to ask you to practice using these pronouns. So the pronouns are your gender pronouns, how you would prefer to be referred to throughout our time together. So if you identify as male, then he, him, his, or you can just say he or him. If you identify as female, then you can say she or her. If you don't want to identify with a particular pronoun, then you can say they or them. Another thing is ze or here, as a way to sort of say I'm not necessarily putting myself in any particular gender binary. But I want to open that up to you, but I think it's important that we start practicing saying what that is, because when you start with yourself, if you're comfortable and start naming, oh, it might be important for me to disclose how I'm viewing myself, then it quickens in your mind that I need to provide that same opportunity for someone else. And then we'll talk a little bit about why, for most of us in the room, we've existed in a world where we would never have had to clarify our gender. And so, of course, we would never think about that would be necessary. And then for other people, they've always existed in a world where they're afraid that somebody's going to label them in a way that isn't comfortable for them. And then I want you to take a risk and say, what do you hope to leave this particular time with? Like, what are you hoping to leave with? So just take a minute to think about that, your preferred name, pronoun, figure out which one you want, and then what do you hope to leave this training with? Everybody, so you just got your first tool in your toolkit, and it's uncomfortable because it's not how we communicate. So I'm Darrell, I prefer he, him, his. We want to, how do you just go ask somebody their gender? Right? That's the first fear thing that we have, because that's inappropriate, it's awkward, we don't do that. Well, you don't have to. You introduce yourself offering the invitation. I'm whoever you are, I prefer X, which then is an invitation that we're saying in this culture, it's actually okay to name your gender identity. Last summer I was running a Bible study series, and my grandmother and my mother-in-law were in this Bible study series. And there were two trans people in the Bible study. And so one of the people in the Bible study phenotypically had characteristics of a biological female, but identified as a male. So God bless my mother-in-law, who kept saying, what did she say? What did she say? What did she say? Now, we are in this affirming, inclusive church, like everybody is welcome at Liberation. And God bless my mother-in-law, who just, bless her heart, is what did she say? What did she say? And this person is sitting there like, boiling, right? But understanding that this is an older person, the same excuses we make for our great-grandparents and grandparents, they don't know any better, and so the energy is to say, just understand, she's old, like whatever the case would be, like they don't get it. And that's a way out, right? Because it's like my mother, she grew up in a different generation, they didn't even talk about this stuff, like we're okay. But that wasn't acceptable. So the trans person came to me after Bible study and said, hey pastor, next week when we go around the circle, can we all say our gender pronouns? And yeah, that's gonna make some people uncomfortable, but like, can we just start introducing ourselves each time? Because maybe next week, she won't keep saying she. And so it's like, okay. So next Wednesday night, we went through it, and I looked at my mother-in-law's face when this person identified as I prefer he, him. And so yes, there was the initial like, oh, but then we moved on. And so we were able to understand that for now on, when my mother-in-law sees this individual, she will use he, him, his pronouns. And we didn't have to do a 5-hour training on transgender identity and understanding how to have the intersections and we really just needed to create a space where people can name their truth, and then everyone else honored it and respected it. I think sometimes we don't actually move forward because we're telling ourselves it's so huge and it's so scary and there's so many layers and I'm not gonna, but really that simple thing changed a system of oppression that would have existed, and I think I need to name, it would have been a system of oppression to have to come to Bible study and every week be referred to a gender pronoun that is not your own. So we change things by empowering other people to be able to name their truth without necessarily figuring out, oh, I need to name your truth for you, right? So I need to create a space to ask you your gender because that's the way, and then we will have done something. No, it was empowering the person to be able to use the pronouns that they wanted. And I want to talk about that. I had known this person years before, and because of their own process, there were seasons where they wanted, even as a trans person, to be she and her, right? And then there would be maybe 2 weeks later that they wanted to be he and him because they were, based on the setting and based on where they were, they felt comfortable. But creating the safe space over those years kept allowing them to identify as they felt comfortable and safe without me going, well, no, I need to tell everybody that they want to be this, right? So again, we empower people by giving the power to them to name their reality when they want to, in the space that they want to. And then what does it require for us? To adjust. Like, I've created the space, you've named how you want to be referred to. So if that changes based on your level of comfort and where you are in your process, I will adjust and respect where you are, right? So I think in that we're constantly able to shift and be nimble as opposed to feeling like, okay, I have to make a decision today because then I will be the most socially just. Two other things that will be helpful for us in this training, and I want to acknowledge that these are my understandings of definition based on some scholarly work of people that I believe in, such as Bell Hooks or Beverly Tatum, and so you don't necessarily have to identify with this. But Dr. Beverly Tatum writes this wonderful book called Why Do All the Black Kids Sit Together in the Cafeteria? And the point of her book is to sort of name, why do people of particular demographic identities go together? Like, what is that about? And in her book, she talks about a definition of racism. And this definition of racism that I think most people get uncomfortable with, but I'm going to name it because this is the framework that I'm operating in. Her definition of racism is that it is prejudice plus power. Prejudice plus power. That is what makes something racism. Prejudice plus power. And then I sort of extrapolate her definition of racism to a number of isms, right? Whether it be sexism, again, it may not be prejudice based on race, as in racism, but prejudice based on gender plus power, right? Or if you think about sexual orientation, right? You may think about, okay, I'm prejudiced against your sexual orientation plus power. Now what this means is that we don't necessarily get to label everyone with the same ism and say that there is an equitable and equal way in which we can be this to each other. And I think that's important, and it's uncomfortable, right? Because that means that if I find myself in the quote-unquote power group, then I have to name and own that that term, that ism, belongs uniquely to my group. Which means that the work is there's more work required of me. It doesn't mean that someone in the other group can't be prejudiced, but it does mean that prejudice in the absence of power is different. Does that make sense? So I'll give some examples. I identify as a man, a male. He, him, his pronouns. So in a social construct in the world in which we live, I have to acknowledge that there is certain power attributed to being a male in this society. There's a song, It's a Man's World. You know what I'm saying? That there's systems and systematic oppression set up that champions me as a man and a person who identifies as a male. So that means that if I choose to be discriminatory or prejudiced against women, even in the lack of their ability, the lack of their intelligence, the lack of their ability to hold or take care of, or whatever the case may be, then my power, along with my prejudice, allows me to be a sexist person and participate in sexism. Which is very different than maybe a woman who's prejudiced against men, saying, like, I don't want anything to do with them, men are capable of this. Society does not give that woman the same power systematically to oppress me in the same way. It isn't saying that women aren't discriminatory or that they don't have prejudices against men. It's naming, though, that the external world will not give them the same platform that it gives me. Does that make sense? So when we think about racism, it's in the same way. If I am a part of a historic group that has certain power in a societal way. Now again, this may not be that my personal family has raised me to believe this. It is like, what is the system that I buy into when I wake up in the morning, right? When I walk into a grocery store. And we have to name these privileges as they come up in ways that, I mean, I don't believe that any person in this room, particularly any white person, said, yes, Walgreens, please make Band-Aids my skin color. And did anybody in here write Walgreens and tell them that flesh Band-Aids need to look like me? No. Or makeup flesh tone happens to just be the color of my skin? No. I don't believe anybody in here wrote, you know, any of those makeup companies, Maybelline or any of them, or wrote Walgreens or Rite Aid or Bartell's or any of them that said, please make the Band-Aid my skin color. But because of the cultural context in which we live, you can go into a store and get the Band-Aid and it's flesh tone. Right? So there's a certain power based on how this country interprets what flesh is, what skin tone is, how we exist in the world, that yes, you didn't ask for it, but it's there. So then you take that power of even something as simple as being able to walk into Walgreens and get a Band-Aid, and then you add a prejudice nature to that, then that's going to become racism, which is different than the prejudice that some people of color might have against the dominant group. So these are the definitions that I'm working with. And again, I'm not saying that these are the right things or that you have to agree with them, but they are a way to proceed. It's a way that doesn't let me off the hook as a black man in America for having prejudices against white folks, right? But it does say that my level of prejudice is sometimes absent or often absent of the power that a white person who's prejudiced against me might have. Does that make sense? Again, and I want to be clear, I will never ask, do you agree? My question will always be, does it make sense? Because I want to give you the privilege of being able to toggle and wrestle with this. How does this show up when you're working with these youth? When we're gonna do an exercise in a few minutes, and that exercise is gonna help you think about, where are the places in which I'm privileged? Where are the places, and I'm going to use the nice word privileged, but the real uncomfortable word is, where are the places where society has given me power? And so when I'm aware of all of the ways in which this society, again, not that you asked for it or that you wrote a letter or told somebody, please give me power here, because most of us didn't ask for that, but because we have societally been given that, then what does that mean in relationship to a person who, as you think about the places of disempowerment, they might have more of those boxes than you? How does that mean? What does that mean about communication? What does that mean about relationship? What does that mean about this term we love, which is solidarity? Right? Solidarity is really uncomfortable when I have way more power than you, but I'm coming to sit down and act like we're gonna sit and eat at the same table, because we're not. And that's very uncomfortable, especially for faith-based organizations, right? Because we want to be like Jesus, and most of us have way more money than Jesus would have ever had. Like, do you know what I'm saying? Jesus didn't have central heat, a Tempur-Pedic mattress. I mean, you know what I'm saying? Jesus didn't have it. Couldn't get pedicures, manicures, couldn't get his hair cut. I don't even know if he took a bath. You know what I'm saying? There's some issues that we have that Jesus didn't have. So, but it's thinking about that. How exactly am I in solidarity? And I think it's about uncovering and unmasking the assumptions we have. Kiantha started by introducing me. I am the pastor of a church. I am the dean of students at Seattle University, right? I own my home. Like, these are different things. I can't even act like, as a black person in America, that my social location is going to be the same as the black folks who are living in Yester Terrace. Do you understand what I'm saying? we're going to show up in the world differently because my social location has given me access to things that their social location has not given them access. So even if you want to clump all trans or all gay people or all black people or all Latino people together, even within the group, intra-group, there are going to be disparities of power. So how a person in Yes Terrace is going to have the tools to advocate for themselves is going to be very differently than the tools I have been given because of some privileges and power society has given me. It's uncomfortable to name because it's easier to just say, isn't it all the same? And it isn't. So those are the things that I think we have to consciously and be aware of. Walk through the world thinking about, okay, what identity is most preeminent right now? What's coming to the surface as I'm engaging with this youth? A few years ago, I was applying for a job, and it was with working with underrepresented minority groups at Illinois State University. And, you know, I'm black, right? So I was like, look, they're gonna get that I am in touch with the needs of these underrepresented minority groups. And there was a black man interviewing me, brother, you get it, like we're on the same page. This man sat across from me and he said, wow, I'm just so concerned that you're not gonna have any relationship with these youth at all. I was pissed. Do you know who I am? Like, what? He said, look, man, he said, I'm looking at your resume. You went to University of Chicago Lab School, which is one of the best private high schools in the city of Chicago. Didn't Obama's kids go there? He's like, then you went to Boston College, another elite private college. Then you went to University of Vermont. Come on, Vermont for graduate school. He's like, you are not gonna know how to identify with these kids at all. And I was mad. How dare you? Of course I understand marginality, like you don't understand. And he was saying, your lived reality is so different from these youth that, man, they're gonna meet you and be like, peace out. You don't know anything about me. And that, again, was this humbling moment, right? Because I should understand, I should have the answers. And here was this other person saying, based on your social reality, dude, you don't. And then I had to take a step back, again, looking at where in society have I been privileged and given power that even as a person who shares a racial identity with these young people, there is still such a gulf of disparity that we may not understand each other's reality. So I say that to you to release yourself from, oh my God, of course, because I'm not a person of color, I'm not gonna get it. Oh my God, because I'm straight, this is not gonna happen. Because even within the community, there are things that may cause a barrier. So when I say I'm a companion to you, I really mean that in its literalist form, which means that even within our identities, we are on a journey to feel and understand how to be in connection in humanity with each other, which may not always mean I'm reaching across identities, but it may mean I'm reaching within an identity to understand someone. Does that make sense? Okay, so next slide. Next slide, sorry. Okay, so we're gonna do this activity called I Am From. And I want you to get a little piece of scratch paper and a pen, and I want you to think about 10 things that define where you are from.
Oh, that's right.
10 things that define where you are from. Sometimes I wrote in there, I come from being the hope and the dream of the slave. And what that means is that I am the only person in my family who has a college degree and a master's degree. So that means that in their mind, I am Bill Gates. Like, really. I got his money, like, I live in his house, and I drive his car. Like, do you understand? And I'm continuously telling them that I am not Bill Gates, but that's their understanding because it's so foreign to even understand it. It's like, you're rich. So I can be like, I got a mortgage, and they're like, yeah, but can you pay that bill? Like, it doesn't, because there's no understanding. Do you understand what I'm saying? So when I say hope and dream of the slave, that's one layer. But what that means in reality is like there's a daily living of trying to explain to my family what my actual reality is versus how they have made it in their mind. So Take some time and do that, right? Because again, the more we are in touch with ourselves, the more we show up authentically and tangibly to the youth. When you are marginalized, you begin to look out for, this is a Christian organization, BS. Bullcrap, can I say that? BC? She said I could say bullshit. You know what I'm saying? Like I grew up really Pentecostal. You can't really curse and drink alcohol, and I clearly have backslid. But anyway, so there's this sense that they look for it. They're looking for you to be fake. They're looking for you to be with the white gloves and that I'm great and nothing's wrong. They're also not looking for you to be a mess either. So I'm not inviting you to show up like, he said be authentic. I'm tragic. Like we're not inviting them to take care of you, right? But we're also inviting you to show up humanly so that they can show up in their humanity. That's the invitation, right? So you see these categories, one up and one down groups. I think, again, for groups who use Jesus as kind of a figure, a prophet, a sage guide, this is important because Jesus would have been primarily in the one down groups. Jesus as a symbol for us would have been a symbol of marginalization as opposed to a symbol of the one up. Jesus was male, but he was not white. He probably was administrative staff, based on where he was. He was the 30s to early 50s, but he was working class or lower class. We don't know his formal education, but he probably didn't have high school. He was Jewish, and I know that's a shock to most people, but he was Jewish. He was born outside of the U.S. So this, he was not attractive, and I feel like he was not comely to look upon. I mean, there's all these interesting things, and he was single, and so there's a number of other pieces there. But when we think about these groups, we're going to think about one-up groups as non-target and the one-down groups as target groups. And another way to say this, as I mentioned earlier, groups with power, groups without power, or a sense of groups who are more privileged in society than other groups. And again, it's not necessarily that you have to agree with it as much as I want you to understand. And some of these are a little bit easier and more comfortable for us to digest. It's important to understand that in the context of this country, if you are a US citizen, you have more privileges, more rights, more access than if you are not a citizen of this country. How many job applications have you filled out that did not require a social security number or some sense of you saying that you are a citizen of this country? If you think about the market in Seattle, the most educated city in the US, right? According to US News World Report, well, most people here, the standard degree is a master's degree as opposed to a high school degree. So if we pretend as if being college educated in our context is not a privilege and therefore leverages some power, then again, we're dealing with a particular different reality. And how you speak, and if you're in a relationship, and just all of the different things that are championed. But then so again, these target and then these non-target groups. On your table, there's also kind of these stages that we go through as we accept our own target or non-target status. The first stage talks about pre-awareness. And I'm going to just go over this briefly, but you have the sheet to kind of walk through it. Pre-awareness and acceptance is that point where you see your group as normal and view the target group as the other. So I work in higher education. Every person that I know in my context every day for 8 to 12 hours a day, depending on how long I'm at work, all have degrees. Bachelor's degrees, master's degrees, doctoral degrees, or multiple degrees. So that could become my normal, right? Everybody has had access to college, like everybody has gone to college, because that is the world in which I live. And if I allow that to be my stereotype, then I start thinking about people who are homeless and other folks in a particular way. I mean, if all these people get a degree, you couldn't finish high school and apply to college, like access to college. Like there's a tape that is informed by who my friends are, by who my normal is, by what my family has done, and then that begins to shape the world. That's very early. Stage 2 is when you meet someone who breaks through your system of denial. And then you start having this internal struggle about like, wow, I thought this was true, but maybe it's not. Maybe people don't have access to education, though I'm constantly surrounded by all these people that have. And so then you start asking yourself the question, what are the things socially and societally that may be causing this fissure? And then we get pissed. This system is so wrong, it's so oppressive. Maybe I don't have anything to do with higher education and I'm gonna go work somewhere else because the ivory tower sucks. This is the moment where white folks are like, I hate other white people. You just get on my damn nerves. Like, I don't even want to be around white people. Like, there's this sense that you just can't stand your group, right? Or you find yourself like, I'm gonna go sit with the people of color because I'm just gonna get pissed if Jane says another thing, you know, but there's this sense of you're immersed and you're angry, right? Because the people in your group don't get it. You're not gonna talk to your family because they're just ignorant. You know what I'm saying? And that anger is kind of where we live, and some of us stay there for a long time. Then we internalize it. We have a clear understanding of self as ally, and we want to do something. Now, I'm going to challenge this one a little bit, and I agree with most things on the sheet. Allyship. The tension about allyship is it actually isn't something that you can name yourself. At my job, we have safe space training. And safe space training means that you're going to get a sticker to put in your window, and because I went through 8 hours of training, now all of a sudden I'm a safe space, and people, queer students and trans students, are supposed to see my sticker and be like, oh, Darrell, cool. None of these students have said, this is a safe place. Like, I talked to this man and he was okay. Somebody in a training gave me a sticker and now I feel like I'm ready. So allyship is an earned privilege that is named by someone in the group with whom you are trying to ally with. So that means a student of color comes to you, or a person of color comes to you and says, wow, I feel safe and secure here. And then unfortunately, that means that you're probably an ally for them. You can't go around like, well, this person endorsed me. This is in LinkedIn. People can't endorse a skill. But that's uncomfortable, right? Because we want to name, like, I am an ally, like, I'm down for the cause. But it's almost this thing that within group, within people, within circumstances, within groups, you're continuously understanding how to be in allyship, right? Because there's people who you think have been even in allyship with you, but then in another setting, other people are like, whoa, no, I don't feel comfortable with you. I don't like your language. I don't even appreciate how you're particularizing this. So it's understanding like, wow, I realize my own privilege and power as a non-target here, but I know that that doesn't give me privilege or right to then all of a sudden be a champion for the cause, because there are spaces I might not be welcome in to do that. Even if it's my job, or even if I feel called, or even if I feel led, it may not be, for me, my keywords are TP, time and place. You may not always be welcome or called depending on the time and the place. So being comfortable with that. And then stage 5, with most of us are not, is typically out in this stage as someone who's actively working against this form of oppression. You are living and you're walking the talk. And I think that in truth, these stages, we go through them almost, I would say, in a cyclical and then a back and forth way. There are times where, as the pastor of an affirming and multicultural church, I love white people. They are my brothers and my sisters. We are in community together. I am equitable and equal. And then I see Baltimore, or DC, or New York, or Chicago, or Seattle, or whatever the case may be. And then I, for a minute, go back into anger and say, wow, we are just not, this country is so racist, everybody. And then I have to emerge myself back out and realize that I'm in communion with my brothers and sisters, and okay. So we're all going through this place. There are times as men we're like, dude, I'm sexist. Like, I really need to work on that. Whoa, I didn't even notice that. And then we get into bro mode. They're like, yeah, man, they don't understand, and they don't, and then we're caught up in that space. And it's easy to go there when you're with your bros, you know what I'm saying? You go right into bro mode right away. And you have to merge out of that and be like, I'm so much better than that, I'm bigger than that, I know better. Because we're always going in and out, in and out, in and out. There are times where I'm a social justice advocate and I go home to Chicago and I'm with the wrong people and I think, oh God, what has happened? You feel like your brain has just retracted and regressed, especially at Thanksgiving or other family gatherings. And you have to pull yourself back out of it again. So none of this is about arrival. There will be parts of sexism that will haunt me for my entire life. And you know when sexism is going to come up the most for me? When I think I'm doing women a favor. I'm a really good pastor, right? I'm so awesome. Like every November, I don't preach. There's a different woman in the pulpit every single Sunday at Liberation, Women in Ministry Month. And so the woman came and said, that's really interesting. Pastor, some people could assume that effectively you've said, let's just relegate women to November. Wait all year. And then in November, here they are, come, everybody, and you're promoting it online, and it's everywhere. And it's like, look at what I'm doing. And I was like, oh my God. Because what I wasn't realizing is that who was the worship leader? A man. Who was preaching every Sunday? A man. Who was the church moderator? A man. Like, it was like men all Sunday. Most of the year. And then November. Dun, dun, dun. So then I realized like, oh wow, in order for me to truly be doing the work that I'm talking about, that there actually has to be valid voices that are representing a diversity of the gender experience every Sunday. And then that's awesome if you want to add November on top of it. But this has to be a weekly experience for people, seeing themselves active in ministry. And that's what I mean by we don't arrive. Even after you have that amazing conversation with that queer youth of color, and you're like, I'm awesome. Like, I embodied the training. I was like, I started with gender pronouns, and they like, And the next student or the next person is looking at you like, back off. That's gonna happen. Okay, so please do this identity exercise. Walk back through the positive identities. Let's go to the next slide. Wake up. Let's go to the next one. Go to the next one. Go to the next one. Okay, so understanding that these are all the things that the people that we're gonna be ministering to are experiencing. Race, gender expression, gender identity, sexual orientation and desire, and assigned sex and their physiology. So these are all of the things that actually all of us are dealing with, but maybe some folks in a more pronounced way, right? All of us are dealing with gender every day. Constructs, expectations, what people want from us, what they don't want from us. And some of us have the privilege of saying, wow, I really feel like that I'm in the body that is my assigned gender, and so therefore I feel like this is who I am, so I can navigate those constructs in a specific way. But say that I don't feel that way. My physiology doesn't match who I feel like I am, right? And then the race issue with that, and then maybe my sexual orientation and desire. And I put sexual orientation and desire because we're living in a time where people are far more fluid than the definitions that we want to use, right? There are people who say, I identify as straight, but every now and again I have a relationship with someone of the same sex, and I desire that experience, but I really see myself in relationship and in partnership with someone of the opposite sex. And are we willing to wrap our mind around that? If that person does not want you to label them as gay, but they see themselves as a different sexual orientation or desire. We can go to the next slide. So we want to get educated and examine our own biases about gender roles, identities, and expressions, and race. Don't rely on queer or trans people of color to educate you. It's not about you. Remember that we each are our own agents and deserve to be treated with respect and kindness. We've already talked about this, using appropriate pronouns and names, and also appropriate ways of allowing people to identify their sexual orientation. I went through a phase where people would say, well, what's your sexual orientation? I would say, I'm sexual. And that I meant that. Like, I wanted that to be open. I did not want to be labeled. I did not want a box. That was my own journey. And it really was frustrating and limiting when, because of somebody else's discomfort, they needed me to be in a particular box. And so how do we allow people to have that freedom and then use gender neutral language as a general practice? We can go to the next one. There are as many ways to be transgender as there are transgender people. I had a wonderful conversation this week with this person who thought they were being helpful. There's a trans-identified person that I know who, within the trans community, there's conversation about whether or not you have the privilege of looking phenotypically for other people's comfort as the gender that you now are expressing yourself as, right? So if I was born as a male, but then I'm transitioning to be female, and do I have the bone structure in the body that I phenotypically could show up as a female? And what do I do about that? So this guy sends a message to this trans person that says, you are gonna be the great source of helping other trans people be authentically trans. And she wrote back and said, what does that even mean? Well, they should be able to carry themselves and basically look like you look. And then she had to push back and say, is it about them looking the way that they want to look, or the way that makes you feel comfortable when they walk into the room? So that's letting a trans person identify the language that trans people use to describe themselves as their own, and respecting a person's right to privacy and their body. Now, this is a kind of no-brainer, but that's I'm not going to ask you if you've had the surgery, or how trans are you, or what have you had done, or do you want to, because it's none of your business, and we wouldn't come up to each other and do that. So how do we just let people describe themselves as they need to, whether it's in our understanding or not? Next slide. Do not out people, treat knowledge of a person's status as confidential, and create a safe and open environment, which is what we are doing with the I am froms and the gender pronouns, and just letting people decide it for themselves and not needing to define it for them. Next slide. We can actually just go to the next one. Finally, understand that gender identity is only one aspect of a person. Different people are going to define themselves a specific way. In certain circles, I am a pastor. That is my preeminent identity. In other circles, I am going to be an African American. That is my preeminent identity. In certain circles, it is my LGBT identity that is preeminent. So just letting people kind of show up as they want to in their particular setting, and not needing to figure out, well, which one am I supposed to be ministering to? Because that person will show up in the way that seems most effective for them. Next slide. And then we'll quickly go through these, and I can send these to you all as well. The next slide just gives you some statistics. 64.3% of LGBT students report feeling unsafe at their school because of their sexual orientation. So again, coming into the setting with what is the context that the person I'm serving is into. So from these teenagers, 64.3% of them leave even an education environment as unsafe, which means that you should assume that coming here, they automatically might feel unsafe, right? At least 64.3%. Next slide. 41% of self-identified gay and lesbian youth report violence at the hands of families, peers, or strangers. Safety, safety, safety. Safety is not a given, it's earned. And it's earned with time. No matter if you have a label that says volunteer, or I'm super nice, or I'm welcoming, you should be presumed that I might be perceived as unsafe. And if I'm perceived as unsafe and I know that, that means certain things I'm not gonna do. I am not gonna just go up and touch her, right? Because I understand that there might be a boundary of safety there. So even physically touching her, I may say, do you mind if I touch you? And then give her the permission to answer that. Because sometimes in loving, we just want to go hug on and love on and da-da-da, and you don't even know that your just embrace might be, wait, no, I don't want to be touched by you. So just basic things like that if you're thinking about a context. Next slide. In a study of depression in gay youth, researchers found depression strikes gay youth 4 to 5 times more severely than their non-gay peers. 4 to 5 times more severely. And our next slide. 68% of adolescent gay males use alcohol and 44% use drugs. 83% of lesbians use alcohol and 50% use other drugs. A 2002 study found that LGBT students who are victims of violence at school have elevated risk of substance abuse. Again, context. How are people figuring out how to make sense of the world that they're in? How are people coping with their lived and their life experience? Next slide. And then suicide rates, which are also just horrible. 36.5% of GLB youth, grades 9 through 12, have attempted suicide. So again, as I said, my hope was not to leave this setting with us all being experts or having all information or everything, feeling like as if you have the stamp, the gold star. But these are things that we can take. Awareness of self is going to be number one. Do you know your target groups? Are you aware of where you're not target? Are you aware of gender pronouns and are you using them? Are you aware of the context these youth are coming in and then your own context? All the things that we said in our item from. Consider the complex identities with the community that you wish to be in solidarity with. And I think my challenge here is to ask, can you actually be in solidarity with? And it's actually okay to say, no, I can accompany, but I'm not gonna act like I'm in solidarity because there's too many things and there's too many barriers that you may never feel that I'm in solidarity with you, and that's okay. But accompaniment and companionship might be your answer. Understand the systems of privilege and oppression are always at play, even if you are a good person who does good things and volunteers and everything else, those things are at play. They're at play with how we see each other as volunteers. They're at play with the people that we're volunteering with. And then be responsible with your positional power. There are places where you are a target and there are places where you are a non-target. In this particular setting, when you have volunteer on you, you have positional power. And if I'm already in a number of target groups, then in this setting, I am first going to encounter your power. I might encounter your power before I get your race, your gender, sexual orientation. I'm gonna first and foremost engage with your power. You are in charge, and it may not be you, right? Because there's people who actually work for this organization, but you are in charge if I eat, you are in charge if I have a place to sleep, you are in charge of my security. Which means that we have to tread with this sense of grace. And that will be my final point. How do we proceed in this journey together